So I got the trailer and the bike all set to go in Shreveport. Did a little bit of riding. Uh, it wasn't as friendly toward cycling as I thought Shreveport would be. Um, Going into Shreveport was really rough coming up from the south side. The shoulder that existed was really torn up, and it was night. It was like almost a nightmare getting into Shreveport. And the areas which actually had bike lanes seemed to be the wealthier areas of the town. The general areas and into the poor areas, it was like no indication of thought put into cyclists. I left in the early morning, like between 5 and 6. The route that the bike map took me through was very hilly, hilliest areas of Shreveport that I had experienced up to that point. But it eventually mellowed out and got into country areas, and it was a pretty enjoyable morning. It was cool, relatively shady in the routes that I started off, and I had a pretty enjoyable time. The route took me through downtown and on this rather long bridge, which was near downtown. It was good that I had started early on a Sunday because this segment of the route would have definitely had a lot of traffic. There was a sidewalk on the bridge, but the only way to get up on the sidewalk was via lengthy steps. So there definitely wasn't any thought put into cyclists that would be crossing the bridge. But there was very little traffic that early in the morning, so it was relatively easy. The route before downtown and after this bridge got mostly into residential areas, so it was relatively easy going between it being early and the rest of the route being mostly residential. I was liking the route which the bike map app was taking me. A distinction between that and the bike mode in Google Maps was the bike map app took me off mainstream routes into side routes a lot more often than Google Maps would have. As you'll see later, there was a disadvantage being on a street bike, but in this leg of the trip, it was pretty nice going into the different residential areas instead of staying on the main route out of town. I find myself stopping at gas station convenience stores more often than I intended. In some of the areas, there are very few options for taking breaks to get a drink or a snack other than gas station convenience stores. So I wind up stopping at them a lot more often than I thought I would. It tends to excite me whenever I see properties with solar panels or wind turbines for the properties. My original plan was to camp in the area managed by a water management area near Bradley, Arkansas. However, I discovered that the route to get to the campgrounds was via a graveled road, which my recumbent would have had a hard time riding. So I had to backtrack a ways back into Louisiana, specifically Spring Hill, Louisiana, which had one motel. It was very 60-ish in the sense that it was maintained, clean, adequate, but not particularly remodeled like a lot of older motels. A lot of it looked probably the way it looked 50 years ago. But it was clean and inexpensive and got me through the night, so it was all good. I did have to ride a bit in nighttime to get there because of having to backtrack. I spent much of the next day on some real backcountry, albeit paved roads. I was still using Bike Map, and it had a singular route which went through the very pleasant country roads. It had some difficulties in the sense that the steepness of the roads increased, and it took me on some lightly graveled, unpaved roads a couple of times. You'll see later on that it got to a point on one leg where I decided to switch away from the bike map and use Google Maps bike mode again because I became concerned about how the vibrations of the gravel route might affect what essentially was a road bike. I started encountering horseflies as big as quarters in the backcountry. I had to start applying uh, insect repellent in addition to the sunscreen to avoid getting bitten by them. They were really able to keep pace with me on the bike, even downhill, but especially on uphill rides. I would have sometimes multiple flies just keeping pace with me, trying to get in, and every now and then one would land on me and immediately start biting me, kind of thing. However, the insect repellent, once applied, kept them from actually landing. They'd still buzz around a bit, but the smell of whatever works with insect repellent kept them away from actually landing and biting me. So I recommend sunscreen and insect repellent on these types of backcountry rides just to cover the bases. I did enjoy the backcountry roads. I had plenty of sunscreen, plenty of insect repellent, plenty of water, and lunch material. So it was pleasant going. For a long period of time, the trees grew close enough on both sides of the road to where I was able to stay in the shade for miles at a time. I spent much of my childhood in rather country environments. The town near where I lived was under 4,000 population, and even today, the population sign says it's under 4,000. There was a small college town of about 15,000 people about 10 miles away, but as a kid, you are mostly near and around the nearest town, which, as I said, was under 4,000 people. So it was quite the country environment. And these kinds of country roads were all over the place. And the house where we lived for most of my childhood, the backyard was basically forest. So we cycled a lot in these kinds of backcountry roads. And then once I got a car, I continued to explore backcountry routes driving. So it was kind of reminiscent to go on these roads, in addition to the general pleasantness of being around the amount of greenery and stuff. most people, even the drivers, were either pleasant and supportive or neutral toward me. There were a number of folks who were curious. Um, there were some instances of negative gesturing toward me. Even one guy on a motorcycle flipped the bird at me, which was contrary to most of the motorcyclists who were either neutral or even gave me positive waves. A couple of cars giving me the fists, either as they passed by or even on the opposite side of the road. Just general hatred towards cyclists. But those were mostly rare cases. I was definitely in Republican territory for most of the ride. There were a lot of Trump signs, and in a few cases, there were mixtures of Trump and Confederate flags waving in people's yards. In one example, there was an American flag, a Trump flag, and a Confederate flag all grouped together. And I'm like, oh, I definitely could have gone without seeing that. I didn't see any progressive or democratic leaning signage or flags until I got into Little Rock. And in Little Rock, there were a substantial number of Biden and Democrat signs. So, in addition to Little Rock being more bicycle friendly than I expected, there appears to be a certain liberal leaning element to Little Rock, which seems, I don't know if there's a pattern, but in Texas, Austin is a more liberal town for its size compared to other areas of Texas. Little Rock appears to be the same case, both being capitals of their states. So I just thought that was kind of interesting that the capital cities of conservative states being more liberal than much of the rest of the states. Anyway, just find it interesting. It's fortunate that people are more oriented toward a default position to outsiders, in that they'll deal with people at a certain level, either positive or neutral, until they have reason to do otherwise. Between the types of signage and the volume of churches, there's definitely indications that these people, or a lot of the people, would not have liked me or treated me as civilly if they knew me as the pansexual atheist that I am. But in most cases, the topic of conversation was more about bicycles and traveling than inquiring about, subjects that would have shown me to be contrary to a lot of their viewpoints. So my interactions with people were on a generally pleasant level. as much as I have a liking for uh, more open physical areas like the country, I definitely see how I would have difficulties living in these areas because of the number of people who hold views different from mine that would eventually create some level of tension among us. That being said, though, I encountered liberal leaning people in even the smaller towns. The case can be made that uh, there's a general tendency for each generation to be more, generally to be more progressive because the amount of knowledge and education materials and such are more available than in the past, so people have more facts on hand. Now, it's obvious with the perpetuation of religion on TV and online media and conservative channels like Fox and Prager University that the less informed folks have an outlet in media. Uh, at least there's the option for people to find out the facts. And as is the case in any environment, there's going to be some number of people in most environments that will go beyond the regularly exposed materials and find out the facts kind of thing. And those are the folks who tend to be more liberal as they find out what reality really is. I did encounter some other cyclists in some surprisingly remote areas, so that was also pleasant. So, you know, anywhere you're at, there's going to be some level of social and environmentally progressive folks. I spent a lot of time from south of Arkadelphia to Little Rock on Highway 67, which had a decently wide shoulder available and had fewer steep hills than the country roads. A bit more boring than the country roads, but I made decent time between Arkadelphia and Little Rock. The recumbent became problematic as I left Little Rock. I already was having a problem with another recumbent specific part, but then the seat bracket broke as I was leaving the motel. It fortunately happened about a mile away from the motel, so I was able to walk the bike back. After consideration, I decided to switch over to a mountain bike. Took a bit, both time-wise and cost-wise, to get back on a mountain bike. It seemed a bit odd for me because I had a mountain bike in Houston, but ultimately decided to do the recumbent. But I have come to realize that the recumbent is not the best option. Yes, it is super comfortable, but the recumbent specific parts have become an issue. I didn't think it would be because I figured, well, they're available online, and one of the nice things about Bachetta is you can actually order parts directly from the manufacturer. But there is currently a pretty broad bike parts shortage, especially for recumbent parts. A lot of it has to do with stuff being made in China, but there's also the factor of increased popularity of cycling in general and popularity of recumbents. So a combination of factors have made the recumbent parts more problematic. Now, with regular bikes or mountain bikes, there is still a bit of a shortage, but with things more standard, there's still a higher probability that I can get replacement parts. Plus, having a brand new bike, there's less likelihood for a while that I'll have a problem. I purchased the one available bike that would fit my size in the shops that I checked at. A bit more costly than I would have normally dealt with for a mountain bike, but it is a really good mountain bike. It's got a wide gear range. making uphills far easier than they were on the recumbent. Um, it still felt, I don't know, weird for me because I had a mountain bike in Houston which I could have used for the trip, but I decided to go with a recumbent instead, and I sold the mountain bike. So it definitely felt weird having to buy another mountain bike when I had one before. But it's ultimately going to work out, I think, because as you saw earlier in this video, there were some gravel options which I became concerned about, being on basically a street bike. Hell, that might have actually contributed to the damage that occurred to the bike, because I did ride gravel roads for a while. I won't have as big a concern with those types of roads because I've got a mountain bike now, but this particular mountain bike has a gear range which I think is going to make the mountain country I'm going into much easier. So look forward to possibly an expanded adventure now that I have a more rugged bike. Until next time, get out there.